Recording is in progress.
All right, so thank you very much, Andrew. It is now week 96 of our Indigenous Global Unity Summit events. We have today Nathan Wright from Mackinac Ode in Petoskey, Michigan as our guest speaker. But before we do anything, of course, I do like to start with a land acknowledgement, particularly important today. We begin today by acknowledging that we walk upon the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize their history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land. We're grateful to all Indigenous groups for their commitment to protect the land and its resources, and we are committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on here in the Greater Toronto Area is the traditional territory of many nations. On the land known in Kanlenkeha as Tkaronto, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Wendat, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and is now home to many diverse peoples. We'd also like to acknowledge the land we are on here is at the meeting place of two treaties, the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and those of the First Nations, the Williams Treaty. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 and is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. We also acknowledge the Two-Row Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Six Nations of the Tkaronto watershed and the settlers, an agreement that bound them to work together, but to develop their societies in parallel on these shared lands. In our role as settlers and displaced people on this land, we share the responsibility of challenging and disrupting colonial systems that enact violence upon the land and stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. We'd like to thank the Indigenous peoples of these lands, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, for sharing this land with us. We also acknowledge and recognize all of the world's Indigenous peoples as stewards of Mother Earth. So with that, I would like to say as well to all our friends, especially in Africa, Asante Sana, or thank you very much in Swahili. Thank you for joining us today for this IGU Summit event. I would also like to say Sawubona, which means I see you, I see myself in you, I see your hopes, your dreams, and your struggles. I see your ancestors as well, because interconnectedness does not end with two people who are greeting each other. It extends to include the ancestors. All beings and Mother Nature are interconnected. There is no sense of being separate. I see myself in all beings, and therefore, if I harm other beings or Mother Nature, it translates into harming myself. Today is Thursday, April 6th, 2023. This is again week 96 of our IGU Summit series. As always, I like to start with an introduction of who I am and who we are and what we do. The overall purpose of UnityNet is to establish a global network of community Unity Garden learning centers where hybrid exchange programs and practical learning will be delivered by the members of UnityNet's partners to all members of the GP4RD, our learning partnership for global unity. The learning programs are intended to be delivered through the Global Sister Schools program in partnership with the members of the Global Unity Network. What we do is to twin our local INAB collaborative communities through the CTP program of the Science for Peace Drawdown Markham Community Climate Action Hub, which has a goal of building holistic, regenerative, climate-smart communities here in the Greater Tkaronto bioregion in support of the UnityNet AHIABGA project of globalization of global goals and the establishment of a localized, productive, compassionate, collaborative, regenerative economy that leaves no one behind. So another thing that I'd like to note as well is that just last Thursday, Pope Francis effectively rescinded the papal bulls, or at least took the doctrine of discovery off the table when it comes to lawmaking in the eyes of those who follow the church's teachings, or in the eyes of many Indigenous people. This is actually huge. So I'm going to be putting in the chat window for those on the call, as well as some links especially to some of the important things that I've been saying today, and as we move forward, so that you can also get more information about some of the things that I talk about. And for those on the call, for instance, for our guest speaker, it is possible to save chat as a text file by pressing the 3 little dots at the bottom of the screen. So this was a new graphic that I created last week. We would like to build a national network of researchers and developers and educators for the globalization of the global goals, with the priority actions focused on regenerative development or regenerative living and lifestyles, which includes regenerative infrastructure and regenerative finance. For us here in UnityNet Canada and UnityNet Ontario, both the Greater Toronto area and the Ottawa Valley, or the city of Ottawa, being the capital of our country, where national decisions are made, are going to be very important hubs of activity, especially around the delivery of the local solutions for achieving sustainable energy for all, regenerative housing and shelter and habitats for all, and regenerative food for all through our local partnership ecosystem, thus helping to demonstrate and achieve holistic, healthy communities for all. So the specific areas of focus for UnityNet are renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, regenerative farming and food production, grown in regenerative climate smart systems, along with regenerative water management, regenerative waste management, or circular economy solutions, for the purpose of economic growth and expansion, but specifically done the regenerative climate smart way, along with supporting integrated localized habitat solutions for regenerative holistic living, learning, and lifestyle developments or redevelopments that help to achieve a localized, productive, compassionate, collaborative, regenerative economy that leaves no one behind. Because within such a development paradigm, it should be possible to continue to achieve economic growth at the same time as we repair the planet, as we continue along the pathway of figuring out how to create a robust and resilient and equitable economic system that does not require continuous and expanding extraction and degradation of ecosystems to survive, and to be both stable and sustainable and leave no one behind. This is the big challenge, of course. So I'd like to mention the INAB collaboratives. What we do in UnityNet through our Drawdown Markham Youth Task Force, and done through the work of UnityNet International and our partners in UnityNet Africa and Diaspora, is establish these localized INAB collaboratives, these interfaith neighborhood academic and business collaboratives that are intended to empower the local productive humanitarian entrepreneurs in each of our own local communities. Our overarching goal is to establish a global network of local INAB collaboratives. The humanitarian entrepreneurs who are members of these INAB collaboratives, including the GP4RD members, are the ones who will deliver the practical local regenerative solutions for achieving these global goals, these SDGs, locally, or as we say, globally. The purpose of the INAB collaboratives is not only to empower the local humanitarian entrepreneurs, but also to help organize the ongoing community engagement, as well as delivering the education and training in the local solutions that are required for local people to understand how to create and run things locally in their own local communities in order to become more resilient, self-sufficient, and decolonized, to better adapt to climate change, to boost their local economies, to ensure equity, and also ensure that nobody is being left behind in their own local communities. The INAB collaboratives also ensure transparency and accountability, and are the vehicle through which we can demonstrate regenerative finance, where a portion of the monies that are spent in the community will stay in the community, but where a portion of the productive profits from the local regenerative community enterprises are also used to help others in other local watersheds and bioregions. And this is done in order to ensure that nobody is being left behind, and where some of those funds could also be used to help others around the world, and to ensure that all local communities can become self-sufficient and resilient and regenerative. Our ultimate purpose is ensuring that every local community in the UnityNet network has an INAB collaborative and a cooperative humanitarian enterprise network that is not only localizing these global goals, but also helping their local communities to achieve a localized, productive, compassionate, collaborative, regenerative economy that leaves no one behind. Our goal is that by 2030, it will be recognized by those who finance projects and infrastructure or provide things like insurance products or reinsurance for other insurance companies, that doing a local project or infrastructure development in any local community anywhere on earth should not get the financing until there is an active and functional INAV collaborative in that local community, made up of the community members and their allies globally. So my name, Lloyd Helferty, co-founder of UnityNet International, which is known as Uni, a hybrid holistic practical learning system management company based in Canada that also assists with community partnership building locally and globally, or as we like to say, locally, by leveraging a set of community engagement activities developed in partnership with the members of the Ad Hoc International Advisory Board of Goodwill Ambassadors, or AHIABGA. I'm also the Chief Ecosystem Director, Program Development Director, and the Sustainable Society Consultant for AHIABGA University, headquartered in Manhattan, New York. I'm located in the city of Markham in the Don River watershed, the German Mills Creek subwatershed specifically, which drains into Lake Ontario, the lowest and last of the North American Great Lakes, in the Great Lakes Basin of the Greater Toronto Bioregion, or the GTB, in Southern Ontario, Canada, North America, also known as Turtle Island. So AHIABGA University is a private 501(c) nonprofit company in New York, a member of the UN Global Compact, a UN Academic Impact member and partner. It's a virtual university created to help empower global populations to reestablish a sustainable balance with their local environments. We do this by designing and implementing projects that support a strong and diversified local economy, while integrating core sustainable technologies and infrastructure into these communities in the areas of renewable energy, high-density food growth solutions, and systems for sustainably managing local waste streams and protecting local water resources. We are supported by over 375 companies whose products and technologies we employ. Importantly, AHIABGA University also supports local education and training in the construction, deployment, and maintenance of all these various integrated solutions for achieving closed-loop systems that in turn support self-sufficient, sustainable communities. So again, I'm putting into the chat my own coordinates and connections for those who wish to connect with me directly here. Again, it's possible to save the chat. I do like to let everybody know as well about our calendar of events throughout the year. I am putting some additional information into the chat for those who wish to connect with some of our networks, in particular some of the programs that we originally developed through Science for Peace. So I do want to talk about events coming up. I'll be showing the audience a UnityNet Living Year calendar that I started creating earlier this year. This reflects our Drawdown Markham and UnityNet GTA plan for 2023. It now revolves around 5 community events in April, May, June, August, and October. With the first one coming up in just a couple of weeks, UNDRIP Day on Earth Day, Saturday, April 22nd. This is where we are engaging with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jose Echeverria at York University, who said that yes, it's most likely we could do our UnityNet drumming ceremony event with the Toronto Black Farmers in Regent Park, Toronto, instead of Markham City Hall. I still need to get a final confirmation from him so we can change our Eventbrite page. Jose and his team will also be meeting, or they also just met on last Friday to discuss and arrange this, so I'm just waiting a word from him. I've also asked Jose, he is very busy, if it might be possible to have someone from his team assigned to ours, whoever's organizing the events in Toronto, as he moves forward with his own, what he calls Climate Solutions Park demonstration projects. I've also suggested that if Indigenous people are present at his Earth Day event in Regent Park that they should be the ones to take a leadership role in the ceremonies, especially the drumming and the smudging. Hopefully we can work all this out in the next couple of weeks. So as we move forward, we also have World Biodiversity Day on Sunday, May 22nd. This is fairly new. We have not done it before, but you can see it in the calendar in the middle in bright red, bright green. So our Abraham Project Tree Planting Day is on Monday, June 5th. This is World Environment Day, the most important day in our calendar when we begin to establish the INAB collaboratives. So there is also International Youth Day on Saturday, August 12th, where we do our globally coordinated Bubble Fun festivals during the UnityNet Community Unity Weeks. And then Youth Peaks Weeks takes place in October, which starts on Global Cooperation Day, which is Wednesday, October 4th. And this is the date of our Ubuntu Summit, which is an online virtual event that also launches not just Youth Peace Weeks, but also our Global Climate Smart Youth Forum, which is the primary hybrid learning week program that takes place until Monday, October 16th, which is World Food Day. You'll also notice I did add Somos Avalon Maya, a spiritual event that takes place with the Maya in Playa del Carmen in Mexico every Sunday at 11:11 a.m. Eastern Time. These are shown in pink on the calendar. Mitch Gold, who's the one who brought this to our attention earlier this calendar year, said we are looking at how to connect the two energies of the eagle and the condor. The last thing I wanted to mention is that on Tuesday, January 17th, way back a few months ago, you'll see in our calendar in orange, we had our first Drawdown Markham virtual event where we discussed establishing our PodNet GTA Enterprise Network, which is also intended to support 25 INAB collaboratives that we do intend to create here in the Greater Toronto area. I did mention in the past weeks that Markham and the Greater Toronto area will be doing everything through these INAB collaboratives, including demonstrating regenerative gardens and forests and farms and buildings and kitchens, and also regenerative finance. We'll also be empowering our humanitarian entrepreneurs who are localizing the global goals in each of these local communities. So I'd like to invite everybody to join us wherever you are. This is the essence of the Global Unity Network, our UnityNet network of networks, which consists of these local and localized multi-stakeholder partnerships, the interfaith neighborhood, academic and business collaboratives, who are changing the paradigm of development globally, one community at a time. I did mention as well in the past few weeks, there are things to consider this year as well, because the FAO came out with their newsletter that noted that this year, 2023, is the International Year of Millets. This is also something that some of our members in the AHIABGA are taking note of. COP15 was also mentioned, especially around adoption of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's also important because we established our set of global biodiversity goals globally through this actions at the Kunming Montreal meeting. There are new goals, these biodiversity goals set in Montreal that should be what we are also supporting, and not just the global goals or the SDGs. So the global biodiversity goals do need to be translated into national goals in each country, considering each country's circumstances and priorities. I will be putting some, again, additional details into the chat. Also important in the 2023 calendar is the SDG Summit, this high-level political forum on sustainable development that will be held under the auspices of the General Assembly, convened on 19th and 20th September. This takes place during the UN General Assembly High-Level Week, where heads of states and governments gather in the UN headquarters in New York and follow up and review the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This has also been added to our calendar. I'm hopeful that we can have a presence at that event, possibly in collaboration with our partners in Manhattan, such as Energime University and We the World. Again, as noted, I'm putting some additional information into the chat. And those who are on with us can save this chat and the information and links to all of this various information. And I'd like to ask, hopefully, for those of us who are coming onto the chat today with us, they will be able to as well share with us their own contact information so we can have some follow-up discussions with them regarding some of the information that we are sharing today as we move forward with our agenda and the programs that we are implementing through the Global Unity Network and our friends around the world, especially in Africa and on the African continent and among the African diaspora. So as we move forward with our legacy projects here at Markham, we've already begun having these local conversations with people from the 7th Generation Initiative. Right now, our interaction with the 7th Gen Initiative is via Dr. Jose Echeverry, who is the leader of the 7th Generation GTB team here in Markham. We also hope we can meet with the founders, Brian Popa and Susan Bosak as well. We hope to soon also have a conversation with Charles Hopkins, the UNESCO chair in reorienting education towards sustainability at York University in the near future. Because as we learned on Tuesday, March 21st, during our Drawdown Markham Zoom meeting, delivered by Leslie Adams, the Biodiversity and Sustainable Development Goals campaigner from the Sierra Club of Canada Foundation, it is actually UNESCO that is doing the work of renewal of the SDGs ahead of 2030, where she noted that the UNDP development program already has a lot of information and suggestions in there. She also noted that we also hope to soon have a conversation with the founders and leaders of the Maple Leaf Center on Action on Food Security, because Maple Leaf Foods, claiming to be the first major carbon neutral company in the world, has also set ambitious science-based goals and targets to reduce their carbon emissions even further. Specifically, Maple Leaf Foods has already started their investments in regenerative agriculture, representing a significant industry milestone in their own words. Today, I have also included in the chat, or will include, a link to the YouTube video by Michael McCain, the president and CEO of Maple Leaf Foods, stating their commitment to become what he calls the most sustainable protein company on Earth. So there is, again, in the chat, some links to, for instance, the 7th Gen Initiative, as well as information about Dr. Jose Echeverry, the Sustainable Energy Initiative that Dr. Echeverry started, information about the UNESCO chair in reorienting education towards sustainability, and some related information about the 75th anniversary of the UN meeting, the one in New York. There is also the Ideas Lab of UNESCO, which I believe is the place that's collecting information about some of the suggestions on moving forward with the next set of goals. There's also some information as well about some of the related local programs here in the Greater Toronto area, such as the Canadian Sports Institute, Ontario Multi-Sport Park, which is being proposed by one of our local councillors, regional councillor, Jim Jones, where we're hoping to have a conversation with him, hopefully in the near future. I want to sit down with him and have a discussion about the potential for that building itself becoming a community UnityNet community unity hub in our local community, where we can bring all of our artists and sports figures and people from our arts community, especially in the learners and students and educators, into those spaces. So again, today is Thursday, April 6th, 2023, it's actually the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace, which makes sense now why I'm focusing as much on the sports development theme. So the global theme for the International Day of Sport for Development and Peace 2023 is scoring for people and the planet. Again, you can find that information in the chat. Again, if you wish to save that information for your own reference, there are many links there. The next big events in April are World Health Day on Friday, April 7th, which is tomorrow. So World Health Day this year celebrates the WHO's 75th anniversary year. So again, you'll find World Health Day information in the chat and a few links. And of course, Earth Day, aka International Mother Earth Day, which we are also referring to as UNDRIP Day, is on Saturday, April 22nd, which of course is also our UnityNet drumming ceremony. You'll find some of that information again in the chat about Earth Day. Also note a new day in the calendar that we created. This was there last week as well. But World Creativity and Innovation Day is on Friday, April 21st, 2023, which is actually one day before Earth Day. It's shown in orange on our calendar. And so this is actually quite important as well for the creative people in our network who are trying to move forward with engaging community members through the arts and culture and sports. So you'll find in the chat as well a link to this World Creativity and Innovation Day and some of the events that are actually coming up here in Canada specifically, but you can actually search on that same web link for your own country, your own community. So there are other days as well that are not recognized in the UN calendar. They are fun events to consider celebrating in our own personal lives. So there's April holiday events and observances link that I'm sharing where I got this information from. So today is Thursday, April 6th, which is also known as National Siamese Cat Day. So this is the day they celebrate Siamese cats, also known as Measers, one of the world's most popular cat breeds. In the US, National Siamese Cat Day takes place annually on April 6th, when cat lovers across the country come together and celebrate their blue-eyed feline friends. This is also National Student Athlete Day, which was first celebrated in 1987 and designed to honor the exemplary achievements of high school and college student athletes who excel in academics and athletics, as well as make a difference in their schools and communities. And I wanted to mention yesterday, Wednesday, April 5th, was also National Walking Day, which happens every year on the first Wednesday in April, celebrated annually in appreciation of those who use their legs to move around from one place to another. So as the name suggests, the day encourages men and women alike to engage in active walking. So you can find in the chat some links to those upcoming events, as well as other things that we are doing. Again, I can save your information or save the chat for yourself. When we close the Zoom, you'll get an opportunity to open that file. As mentioned before, we're still planning to have a discussion primarily with Sir Bailey from Youth Build Charter, Michael Rendler from our C4 group, our Climate Smart Community Construction Collaborative, where we hope to also talk with people like Lynn Crandall and Marcella Oliva and Isaac Sabat-Kije about the next Earth Fest, which is also being planned, where we hope to also co-host our hybrid events with the UnityNet, GTA, and PodNet partners in all of our Wikipod collaborators. We hope this event will also help spark the imagination of young people, teachers and their parents, and elders who are working with the local learners in our schools here in Markham and York Region in the greater Toronto bioregion, who can also be empowered to take action through our Global Sister Schools program, starting with the planting of the youth peace gardens. We also hope to work with those in close collaboration with all of those members of our UnityNet Ontario and Canada chapters, including the co-founder of the Indigenous Global Unity Network, Mr. Michael Scher, who'd like us to begin having a conversation about practical reconciliation, starting with the development of a curriculum related to his Indigenous Unity flag, where he wants to establish a legacy education project where he'd like to do it in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, possibly also with Scouts, Scouts Canada, Scouts Europe, hopefully with more partners like Rotary International, as they seek to implement an Indigenous Unity badge for the young people who are participating in their programs, where we can partner with local schools, especially schools of the arts and schools of architecture, in each of our own local communities, across our network of networks, where we can host a series of virtual and in-person charrettes to help Michael and the Scouts come up with this curriculum, hopefully over the next few months, where the curriculum would help young people understand that every country has their own Indigenous peoples, but that we must become compassionate members of a global society of humans as an essential part of a process of real reconciliation. Where the key people we have in our projects are the members of the Unity Learning Network and the Global Sister Schools Program, and others who may wish to contribute to this process and the efforts. So again, I think I will probably stop at this point before, or instead of going through all of these additional slides, so we can bring on our guest speaker today. Just remind me if we do want to come back to these. I do want to mention this particular date, of course, which is coming up on Saturday, April 22nd. So this is in just a little over 2 weeks, where we will be having this UnityNet 100th Day event, drumming at City Hall's event, which again, we're hoping to do in partnership with the UnityNet GT or the UnityNet GTV projects team, a partnership with York University. Potentially, we will be moving this event from our Toronto or Markham City Hall down into Toronto as well. So that's something that we are currently trying to get confirmation about doing, and I will update our Eventbrite page that you see on the screen at this point, which says gather at the Markham City Hall, but will be updated as we move forward and decide that final location. So Nathan, I'd like to ask if you are prepared to come online and do your presentation.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lloyd, for the wonderful information about your organization, and I'm honored to be here. Thanks for the invite, and I'm looking forward to giving this presentation and being a part of your global network. Can you see my screen okay, or is it, it looks like
Plants of the Great Lakes.
Yep,
yes.
Yep, okay. Is it the full screen, or is it just like the whole program, or is it just?
It's the whole program that you've got, but
okay.
if you just maximize that, you should be able to.
Let's see, I know there's a way of doing this. I'm a little rusty. It's been a minute here. See if I double click on it. No. You know how to maximize I'm on PowerPoint, so we're just looking to maximize the screen.
It should be just right next to your mouse, a little to the left there. That
to the left. Let me know when I get there. You see,
go in the top corner. You'll see that what looks like the other corner in the left.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so that one. You were right on top of it. Just a second.
This one.
That one. Okay. Yes.
All right. All right. Okay.
There we go.
All right. So welcome everybody. This is Plants of the Great Lakes, as well as Anishinaabeg herbal traditions. We're also going to talk about the Anishinaabeg and interacting with your surroundings and respect and reciprocity, just different elements of how we as Anishinaabeg people in the Great Lakes area lived and how we basically worked with the land. And as many of us who are indigenous know, as well as others, that when you are growing plants or wild foraging them, you develop a connection. And I've met a lot of people that don't necessarily know how to expand on that. And it really surprised me, and I think it's just the way that I was raised. So they really enjoy hearing these classes. But we're going to branch off a little bit into a couple other things, and we should be about an hour in this presentation. And then we'll take questions. If you want to put them in the chat, you can, and I'll take a moment here and there to look at them. But then at the end, I think if we have time with up to Lloyd here, if we have time, we could take some questions and answers. So with that, let me see if I could do there we go. Okay.
So I'm
So
going to
this
mute
is
myself just so.
okay. So this is a little bit about me. Let me see. I got to move this little screen window so I could read it. So I'm an indigenous herbalist, owner of Herbal Lodge, which is a company here in Petoskey, Michigan. We make traditional based Native American salves and teas. I'm an environmental advocate, a water protector, a mushroom expert. I'm on a group called the nonprofit group called United Plant Savers. I'm on the executive board. Wonderful organization if you're not familiar with them. I'm a wild forager, medicine maker, outdoor adventurous naturalist, a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians with roots to First Nations Batchewana Band and Anishinaabe, and I'm a member of the Crane Clan. Okay, so what we will discuss today is one with nature, reciprocal relationships, shared resources, plants and animals taught us, our ancestors planted gardens, sacred plants, ethical harvesting, protocols, follow teachings from area tribes, offerings, cultural appropriation, land acknowledgement, and then we'll take questions. And some of these I believe, are going to be, as I've spoken to other indigenous cultures throughout the world, we have some similar things. So I'm going to be interested to hear afterwards when we do the questions, what you have found in this class that is similar to your culture. I'll give you an example, and I wish I would have included this in this presentation, but there is a dance that was being done, I think it was by the Lakota, and they met with another indigenous culture that was over in Europe somewhere. I forget which, my apologies. But they realized that their dance movements were extremely similar. And it was amazing to watch them dance. And they were both like, wow, this almost seems like it came from one place. And just over the years, it slightly changed. So I really love seeing those types of connections, because it shows how much more connected we really are when you dig back into our roots. So this is myself. Sorry, my video on my camera is not working right now, but that's a quick shot of me. And what I'm doing is I'm in a canoe, and we call this a G-man. And this is around August of last year, and we're wild ricing. And wild rice is a very important food for the Anishinaabe. It actually created a lot of change for us. We actually migrated for this food, because we call it monoman, food that grows on water. And we migrated from the end of the St. Lawrence Seaway, or the beginning of it, the St. Lawrence Seaway up there near Maine and Newfoundland. And then it comes in all the way to the Great Lakes, where you can see Michigan, for those of you familiar. And we moved in to get this food. This food that grows on water helped us survive. And it was an amazing gift for us. And we really, we planted, back then we planted and expanded on some of these gardens, and we'll talk about that here shortly. But I love doing this, and I love doing it in my bare feet, as you could see there. I love that connection that you could have with Mother Earth doing this. And it's kind of a tricky thing, you know, because you have one guy like what I'm doing. I have that pole is kind of shaped like a Y. So at the bottom, that Y is digging into the dirt so we can move forward. We're not using like paddles, you know, like they normally use in canoes. And then on the other side, someone's actually using two sticks that are about 3 feet long or about a meter long. And then they're pulling in the rice and hitting the sticks. Some people do it differently, but that's basically what you're doing. And you're knocking the rice into the bottom of the canoe. And then we go ahead and process it. It's very tedious, but we've been doing it for a long time. And we're trying to encourage others to learn more about it. So it's a very beautiful experience. Okay. Okay, so how did the Anishinaabe fit in with nature? Well, we observed and learned. We did not fight with nature. And I believe we imitated nature, and nature was a blueprint for us as to how we learn to live as Anishinaabe. And by the way, Anishinaabe means the original people. That's what we our name was given to us long ago. So, and then we're going to go over some examples of how we managed land and what we learned about ourselves. But I wanted to touch on these 3 bullet points. So we observed and learned. A good example of this are the plants that you see out in nature and how they work together. And I think science is learning more about this. You know, a lot of this indigenous science, as some call it, has actually been proven by modern scientists to be accurate and true. Almost everything, even some of our stories and our teachings. So with plants, when they work together and you see a bunch of different types of plants growing together in one spot, no invasive species, they have a community that is working together in a manner that we don't even understand. And I think some of the plants in our gardens, we've learned a little bit about this as well. And we'll talk about that here shortly. So same thing with animals. Animals taught us long ago what plants we can eat, what medicines are good for different things. And it was just through our observation. So it's my belief that a lot of our Anishinaabe or Native American cultures, we literally learn from Mother Nature. So we are children of Mother Nature, Mother Earth. We literally learned from that. And that, I think, is what really helped us with that connection that we have. And then we didn't fight with nature. That would be the equivalent of how permaculture, a lot of you are familiar with that, where you work with the land, you don't fight the land. So that's very similar to that concept. So before the European arrival, the indigenous people of Turtle Island protected ecosystems and preserved biodiversity through land management and farming practices. And this is a picture of, looks like they're planting corn here. I don't know what nation that's doing this, but I thought it was a good picture to add for this. Okay, so intercropping, and this is what I was talking about. So remember, I was mentioning how different plants, you go out in nature, they're growing together, helping each other out. Well, we have intercropping when we grow our gardens. Indigenous farmers have planted more than one crop together, a practice known as intercropping. And I'm sure some other indigenous cultures do that. What's the most common one up here, or I should say the most popular one up here, is the Three Sisters, a combination of corn, beans, and squash. And if you notice, you have the corn stalk, and then you have the beans that grow up it, and then you have the squash down at the bottom, the big leaves that you see at the bottom. Successful intercropping, growing crops that complement one another with minimal competition and resource. And the Three Sisters that we just seen, a lot of the after effects of when these vegetables have grown and have been harvested, that there's nitrogen that's returned to the soil. It's almost like a very natural way to grow things. And that's why at my gardens that I have up here in Petoskey, that's what I always try to do. I don't want to say I'm trying to do it the lazy way, because to me it's not. I'm trying to do it in a natural way. I don't I want to find a better way, as we all do, to remove weeds, maybe in a natural way, maybe use cardboard or put it on top. But that's why this is all fascinating, learning about different indigenous methods, because you pick up things that other cultures have done that make sense, that go back thousands of years, that could actually help you out in your own garden today. So polyculture, that is imitating nature by planting different species of plants in the same area. I wanted to talk about polyculture. I think there was an image there that didn't print in, but that would be similar to what we just seen with the Three Sisters, but actually more along the lines of, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you had, well, here, this would be a good example. So ginseng is an amazing plant that we use the roots, and it can give you energy. It could help out with men issues, and it's just an amazing plant. But unfortunately, it was over harvested because it was valuable, and it still is. So you don't find it growing out in the wild. So we've learned to wild simulate it, and one of the things that we would do with that is grow it on north facing slopes, because that imitates where it normally would grow at. That's probably not the best example, but that's one I could think of right now. You're basically imitating how plants are being grown in the wild. And another quick little tip, we used to do a lot of transplanting, me and my father. So one trick we would do is we would put a little ribbon. If it was like a bush, we would put a little ribbon that was facing the south. So when we would replant that, we would put it the same way. So that little ribbon was facing south. And what that did was it allowed that plant to believe that, give it less shock, because it's already in the same configuration it was when it was originally planted. Lloyd, do we have any questions right now that I'm?
We'll have questions and answers probably afterwards, but if
Okay.
somebody, I'm watching, if somebody puts up their hands at any time, I can always interrupt.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so water management, sustainable agriculture uses water management practices and climate-specific adaptations after pre-colonial practices. There's many examples of indigenous cultures here in North America doing this. I think one of the greatest ones are what the Aztecs did, where they had floating gardens, and they used basically rafts with soil inside of them to grow a garden that is naturally watered. And I've also seen some tribes that had built little caverns, like little rivers, where the water, kind of like a water, kind of like a water hose, but without the hose. So it would be water that would travel to the different plants that they were growing, and it would automatically water them. And that's the type of thing I look for when I'm growing my garden. Like, how can I do something similar to that? So agroforestry, the management of trees, crops, and the four-legged that benefit all three. A good example of this would be sometimes when you have, hold on a second. So when you have property. And up here in northern Michigan, we have a lot of people that like to hunt deer. So this might be a good example of that, believe it or not. So what they do is they cut down some trees and have them kind of hang over. And they do that for the cover for the deer. So that provides deer cover. So more deer are likely to bed there. And then they also maybe make trails for the deer. And there's other different methods that are used in agroforestry to basically work with nature, but have everything benefit not only the crops, the animals, but the trees as well. Burning. This is something that actually happened quite a bit. We didn't have any trucks or any type of big equipment that people use today, or a tiller or anything like that. So what we would do is take sections out in the woods and we would burn them in a controlled manner. That would provide a lot of nutrients into the soil. And of course, up here in northern Michigan, where this really great tasting mushroom called the morel is about to happen. People go crazy for this mushroom up here. They really get excited when they find it. It's a really great food. But we're finding after forests up here have burned within a year or two, those particular areas are great places to go to for your morel mushrooms. Of course, that is true with other plants that end up growing after you did a burning. And this is just an example of it. So permaculture, which we mentioned earlier, is an agricultural system that are sustainable and copy natural patterns while allowing for production. And that's basically where you're working with nature and you're not fighting it. What I like to do a lot when I'm planning a garden is I look at what is currently growing there, what kind of plants are growing there. I read about them. I see what kind of sun they take. And I go by that more so than what a book tells you, because I'm amazed at some of the things that could actually grow underneath trees that they say require full sun. I've seen this and witnessed this myself. I've witnessed, the microclimates. You could have one part of your property that has a complete different climate system. I'll give you an example. Some plants that grow in wet areas, I've discovered if you have a dip on your property or the land that you're using, if there's a dip and maybe you could throw some wood chips around there or whatever, that will make that almost not exactly like a wetland, but it'll make it wet enough for those plants that require a lot of water. And that's a good example of permaculture, like working with nature, working as not fighting against it. There's a lot of people up here that are against, that are into permaculture. Actually, I think most everyone in permaculture is against it, but they don't like using a tiller, because when you till up the land, and I understand you have to do it in some cases, I get that, but the belief with permaculture is that if you till it up, you're destroying the mushroom network that is underneath, the roots that are underneath that are helping each other out. You're affecting that, and you're almost like resetting the land. So there's a lot of people that don't do that for that reason. So plants and animals were our teachers. Our society as Anishinaabe were formed by what we observed from them. And on your left, that is a stinging nettle plant, and it is a plant that can be used for pain. It's kind of a funny plant, because let's say you have like pain on your wrist. This has little tiny needles in it. And if you were to take that and hit your wrist where that pain is, it'll sting. I mean, that's the reason why it's called stinging nettles. But that sting will take away the other pain that you currently have. I know it sounds funny, but it in a weird way, it works. This is also good for mixing with meats to add more nutrition to it, to kind of extend your meat. You know, a lot of the meats that they have in the stores today are they put a lot of fillers in there, and you know, just a lot of things that aren't good and healthy for you. This is actually a filler that is good and healthy for you. And you don't get stung when you eat this, by the way, because the stingers are naturally put out when you cook it. And it's also good for allergies. If you have really bad allergies, this is a great medicine to drink as a tea. So we observed what animals ate for medicines, watched how plants work together. We learned to share resources. We did not compete. And a good example of that is if we went into an area and we were harvesting medicines, I do this very often, and I'll see some bees or some other insects or even maybe some animals eating it, I will skip it. I will go to another spot because to me, that's not mine to take. That is something they have. They have it. So I give that respect. And when I do that, I find that good things happen to me. Like I might find a better place or something else might happen. So that it's very important to be respectful with nature and also, of course, your own gardens, because as all of us know who have done this, you are blessed. You get something back for your being respectful. Okay. So different perspectives. We view forest as a shared resource. That means for everyone. Mainstream views things from an individual perspective and monetary value. So this is something that is a bit frustrating for a lot of indigenous people here on Turtle Island. We view the forest differently, and we see it. I've talked to mainstream people a lot, and they view like the trees and everything as money. That's a lot of money there. All those big tall trees is a lot of money. And when I look at those big tall trees, I say, geez, that's beautiful. There's probably a lot of medicines that are going to result from those trees being there and protecting the forest and protecting the land and the mushrooms that grow there and the different herbs and plants that grow there and the birds that come that drop seeds from their poop. You know, they're very important. The insects, the frogs, everything. And I believe, even from a mainstream perspective, there's probably more value there in us being able to go into those forests and to have these experiences and to heal from whatever is bothering us. Because a lot of us know when you go out in the woods for a nice walk, you feel really refreshed afterwards. There's just more value having those lands. And I understand that we need trees for things and that, but there's just different ways of doing it that are more respectful. So our ancestors planted gardens that still exist today. This is an interesting thing because I've come to find out that if ever I'm looking for a medicine, wild foraging, going out in the woods looking for it, and I can't find it, I've actually went to areas where there used to be villages and found medicines near those villages, which I would have to imagine were planted by my ancestors, villages that no longer exist. And I've been amazed by that. It's almost like you could see patterns of where your ancestors walked and what they did. And it's actually fascinating. I don't even think anyone's ever written or talked about that before, but it's very fascinating. But one of the things that are clear to see for most people in this area is the wild rice, the manoomin. These are gardens that were already here, but a lot of them we actually planted ourselves, and we are still planting them today. We are restoring them by going into places where the water's clean, because wild rice can only grow in clean water. And what we do is we basically create like a mud ball, and we throw those mud balls in certain depths of water, and then we go back the next year and see if it grows. And we've actually seen them grow and increase in size And then after a couple of years, it's ready for us to go out and harvest it. But we always do this, by the way, whenever we go out and harvest wild rice, there's always a large portion of that we keep for reseeding. We call that reseeding. But this is a very beautiful, unique, distinct thing that we do as Anishinaabe up here that we're very proud of. I'm actually working on a committee right now with our state here in Michigan to try to make this into a state grain, which would help with regulation of it, because so we have more people who are starting to want to harvest it, but there's no regulations for it. And it's kind of an awkward situation because we are Indigenous people who have, and these are our gardens, but we don't really have total control over them. And so the protocols that we had for harvesting wild rice are not even in use. And an example of a protocol that we had kind of goes along with the land acknowledgement. And that's probably where it originated from. But whenever we go to other lands, especially lands that weren't ours, maybe another tribe that was near us, we would always ask permission. And we still do this to this day. We will contact a tribe's department that they have that does this type of work, maybe their environmental department, and we will ask them permission. And most of the time they'll say, yeah, go ahead. Or they might say, well, we're going out here on this time of the year, so maybe you guys can go out afterwards, you know. And so it's that respect, that reciprocity. And I think that's probably the origins of the land acknowledgement, that we're showing respect. And then of course our culture, maybe that's a slide coming up with the tobacco offering, but I'll talk. Whenever we harvest a plant or any type of medicine, we give respect to the land by offering tobacco. We use our left hand and we offer tobacco out of respect. It's an exchange, a reciprocity. So we continue to plant and maintain these Monoman wild rice gardens. But what happens when others come to use the gardens without the consideration of those who planted them? So sacred plants. With the rise in interest in indigenous culture, plant medicines overharvesting is occurring on some of the most sacred medicines, sage, bear root, etc. So I'm sure many of you, especially those of you on Turtle Island, have seen the sage bundles and natural food stores at different markets. So what has happened is the sage that grows out in California, we call it, some people call it California sage, some people call it ceremonial sage, but it's a very powerful smelling sage and a lot of people really enjoy it. And I would say up until maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, most people that used that were indigenous. But because of the interest in indigenous cultures, we now have lots of different companies that are non-indigenous that are just harvesting it to make money. And, you know, while I understand, you know, people need to make money, it's that this, because it's one of our sacred medicines, is something we feel should be off limits or just reserved for indigenous people. And that's the part that is hard to convey to the general public, and that's something we are working on. I mean, we understand we want to share the resources, but when the resources are starting to dwindle, there's a time when we got to say, hey, hold on here, you know, this is something we need to show respect to and not harvest right now, and let it restore itself. So ethical harvesting, replanting seeds as you harvest, taking only what you need, respecting Mother Earth. So the replanting seeds as you harvest, a good example of that again is wild ginseng. It's when we would harvest it in the fall time, there were these big red berries that grow on top. And we would take these berries and we would put them in the soil when we'd harvest the roots. Now, those seeds have to go through what's called a stratification process. And they're not going to grow the next season. If you harvest it in August, it's not going to pop up in May. It's going to pop up the next year. it has to go through a process called stratification. And so we do that when we harvest. And sometimes there's not a book or anything that talks about how to do this, but we learn as we're going out there. The other thing I like to replant are the plants that eat pitcher plant. Pitcher plant is a plant up here that eats insects. So there's some seeds that come out in the fall time, and I harvest those seeds, and then I spread them around areas where they would grow. I haven't had, too much results with it. I'm still experimenting, but that's the kind of thing that I do to give back to Mother Earth. I take it upon myself to do that. And of course, as I mentioned before, taking what you need. So if we see a big plot of plants or medicines, we don't grab all of them. I grab the ones that are in the best harvest shape, the best shape to harvest, but I leave a lot of it there. And there's some places that I go to, I harvest throughout maybe a 2 or 3 month period. I just keep going back. And when I go back, there's bigger plants, but because I've been doing it in a respectful manner, that whole batch continues to grow. And the other thing I've learned in my own wild foraging and harvesting is when I step on these roots, I'm activating those plants. I'm sending a message to those plants to grow more. And I've seen that happen too. I've heard, when you read things in a book, that's one thing, but when you experience them and witness them for yourself, it's amazing. And then, of course, we always show respect to Mother Earth, offering tobacco when we harvest. So protocols. How can we be respectful to Indigenous communities when we harvest, know about their restoration projects, and ask permission when in doubt? This is what I was talking about with the committee that I'm on, where hopefully we'll get to this point. We're not really talking about it just yet, but once the wild rice is recognized as a grain in the state of Michigan, hopefully it'll open the door for all of these things. So as I mentioned before, when we go to harvest wild rice, or anything for that matter, the proper thing for us to do, the traditional thing for us to do as Indigenous people, is to ask permission. But in the same manner, that is something that could be extended to the mainstream culture as well. But that is something that's not regulated, and some people might be offended by that in mainstream. But this is something that benefits all of us, because we're monitoring things, and we're keeping track of who's been to this place, and so we could maintain it better. Because there's a lot of people that, there's a lot of forest management here in Michigan, for the most part, is really a tree business. It's really more about harvesting trees than it is managing the forest. For example, they don't replenish the medicinal plants that grew underneath these trees. They don't do that at all. They just plant seeds. So these are things that we're trying to work with our state, and we encourage other tribes and other people around the world, Indigenous people, to perhaps do the same thing. And always ask permission when in doubt. That's another thing. We have this land acknowledgement thing. I think we need to start thinking about how can we have mainstream people ask local tribes for permission to harvest in their areas. And I understand not everyone will participate in that, but it would be just a step in a good direction, I think. Following teachings from local tribes, for example, controversial plant names. So this is something that came up with United Plant Savers. There were some plants that were named inappropriately, like squaw, which is considered derogatory. So there's like the squaw root, and there's these different controversial plant names that we're trying to change or encourage people to change. And whenever you're in doubt, whenever you're in a certain area and you don't really know what the proper thing to do is, it's to really follow the teachings from the local tribes. because every tribe is different. And I'm sure this is the same with all indigenous cultures throughout the world. We were given that respect to one another. And we have our ways that we were taught, but that doesn't necessarily mean those ways are good in this area. You know, everyone has their different teachings, and we just have, there's over 530 tribes in Turtle Island, actually more than that, but each one has a different language. Each one has a different way they do things. And then this is offerings. How can I, as a non-Indigenous person, make an offering when I harvest plants? So a lot of people have asked me this question about offering tobacco. I'm non-Indian, can I offer tobacco? And the teachings that we received as Indigenous people were basically, if you're on this land and you're harvesting something, you would offer tobacco. So it's almost a universal thing. I don't know why we would ever think about excluding anyone from doing this, because it's showing respect to Mother Earth. And if someone's on the same land that I'm standing on and I'm offering tobacco, I can't understand there being a rule against that person not offering tobacco, as long as they have good intentions and they're doing it in a respectful way. So in a nutshell, the way we do it as Indigenous people was we carry our tobacco with us, and we try to get good tobacco. A lot of people are growing their own tobacco up here now, and we're trading that. But you try to use really good tobacco, and you put it in your left hand, a small portion of it, maybe an inch, maybe like the size of a quarter, size of a, I don't know what monetary sizes of coins that people have throughout the world, but basically the size of a quarter. And then some people hold it up, but you just basically say a private prayer. My name is Nathan Wright, and I'm here to harvest this medicine. I'm going to use it to help somebody that has this particular condition. I am here in respect, and I do other things to help the land by protecting the water. You know, you kind of state your intentions, and you're very clear and exact with that. So land acknowledgement. I remember when I first went to an event that I was invited to speak at, and they did this. I didn't even know they were going to do it. And it's basically, here, let's go to the next slide. So land acknowledgement is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many communities and nations. For non-Indigenous communities, land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous people of the land on which we worked and lived. So this is one that's used by the Michigan State University, and I use this one because it's kind of basically to the point. So Michigan State, this is what they would say. Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of the Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize Michigan's 12 federally recognized Native nations, historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. In this offering, this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. Now that's a real powerful statement, and this can apply, I think, to any Indigenous cultures around the world. But when I first heard this, I didn't really know what to think. It was kind of like unbelievable. But and we have people out there, Indigenous people, with different perspectives about this. You know, some people agree, some people might not, some people think more should be done. But I think it's a nice way of showing respect. It's exactly what goes along with our culture and our teachings about being respectful. And that is, it's a respectful statement for someone to make. And I mean, I personally like it. I think it's just shows respect. And when I hear this coming from a group that I am working with, it makes me feel more comfortable as an Indigenous person, because they're showing me respect, because I'm going to give that respect back to them, because that's the way I was raised. We're always respectful. cultural appropriation. Now, this one's a really interesting thing because it's a hard thing to understand. But from being indigenous people in North America, I think we're a lot more sensitive to cultural appropriation because of the things that have happened to us, our lands being stolen, and now essentially our culture being stolen. And in some cases, the work that we're doing, like making baskets and selling them, those things are being taken from us now. So cultural appropriation is defined as the adoption or exploitation of another culture by the more dominant culture. It has been defined as taking intellectual property, traditional knowledge, cultural expressions, or artifacts from someone else's culture without permission. This can include unauthorized use of another culture, dance, dress, music, language, folklore, cuisine, traditional medicines, religious symbols. It is most likely harmful when the source community is a minority group that has been oppressed or exploited in other ways, or the object of the appropriation is particularly sensitive. So again, this could apply to any indigenous culture throughout the world, but here on Turtle Island, North America, I give you a good example that I've witnessed. I've seen some. I'm a business owner. I sell my products, but I've been in stores where they are selling non-indigenous products, but they're intended to appear to be Native American. And so in a sense, they're taking space from me, because if I go in there and then they say, well, we're already carrying something similar to this, and I look at it and I say, well, this isn't Native American, they don't care. So that person just took that space from an indigenous person, and that's an example of where cultural appropriation hurts people. Or another thing would be if you had an elder who was someone that built canoes or maybe made drums, and then someone else came into that community that was non-indigenous and started offering classes, and they just took away from that elder. They appropriated something. They took away from the way they make money. Now, there's other different cultures that have different beliefs in this area. They have different beliefs. And I've even had someone say, well, aren't you appropriating culture by being here in the US? And I said, no, because I did not appropriate this culture. This culture was forced upon my ancestors. So no, I'm not appropriating. And if anything, I'm trying to restore my Anishinaabe culture so I can live in this world. I could live in a balanced manner. So I think we're here. We're ready for some questions here. How we looking on time, Lloyd?
So we have, it is now about 25 minutes after 12. We have until 1 o'clock.
Okay.
That's a hard cutoff time for us. So we still have about 35 minutes or so.
Okay. So I guess for now, we could just take
does
some
this
questions.
end your main presentation then?
No, I think I got a couple slides here.
Okay.
Let me shrink it down here. I got a few more slides here, but I'm almost done. Yeah. So I wanted to ask maybe just the second question, do anyone out there want to talk about maybe something in addition to what was mentioned about how you acknowledge lands or what you've heard? And the reason why I'm asking this question is that this is an area that's grown, people have added more to it. Excuse me while I flip through here to get where I was at. But does anyone want to add to that? Like, what have you heard that could add to this land acknowledgement that I'm trying to find here? Okay, so this one.
So for myself, as you had heard in my own land acknowledgement that I did at the very beginning, you'll have heard as well that I had in particular mentioned the names of the treaties in particular the Williams Treaty and what's called Treaty 13. And I also mentioned the Wampum Belt Covenants, in particular the Dish with One Spoon and the 2-row Wampum Belt Covenants. There is also, and I haven't included it so far in our land acknowledgement, the covenant chain concept. So this is something I think I'm learning as well myself. And so those in particular, 2-row and Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt covenants, I think are very important. And these are covenants that are intended to continue through the generations, which is the covenant chain. And I think that is something that I haven't yet come across the right wording yet. I did add those though to my own land acknowledgement when I updated it a few months ago.
I like that, Lloyd, that you did that. And this, it's almost like these land acknowledgements in a way are almost like short introductions to who you are or where we're at, I should say, because the other part that we do as Indigenous people is we always announce, we say, Ani Bojo, Gizasuanene and Disnakash, Chichak Dodambao Tindonjaba. So I basically said, hi, my name is Nathan. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie. I'm a member of the Crane clan. And, it's nice when people say hello, hi, but they don't really tell you anything about themselves. So I think it actually builds more connections as humans when we say that. Now imagine someone, even a non-Indigenous person saying, hey, my name is such and such, my family is this family, we originated from this area, and a lot of the work I do is in this area or something like that. That connection to me is more powerful. If you notice in society, in mainstream society, one of the first things someone asks you after you say hello is, where do you work at?
What do you do?
What do you do? Yeah. And you know what they're really doing? And I don't know if they're aware of this, but they're gauging if you are someone they should be able to, they want to continue to have a conversation with. In other words, how much money do you make? And do you make enough to where I can talk to you? Because if you don't, I'm not going to waste my time, because then there's no benefit for me knowing you. And I'm not saying that happens all around, but I am saying it is a very popular thing, especially, with people that are in the corporate businesses and stuff like that. That's it. To me, it's insulting when someone asks it. I mean, it's one thing if they say, what do you like? What are your hobbies? I'll answer that all day. But if you're doing it to gauge on whether you should continue to talk to me or not, I would probably would rather just end the conversation right there, because I like to make a living like all of us do, but I don't, because I'm an Anishinaabe, I don't base my life on being wealthy or chasing money. Maybe when I was younger, I might have thought that way, but as I've grown older and learned more about my culture, I found my happiness. And my happiness is not how much money I have in my pocket. My happiness is through the experiences that I live every day, the beautiful people that I meet every day, what Mother Nature and the trees, when I go out in the woods, tell me and inspire me to do. And that might sound like a very, I don't know how that comes across to some cultures, but I found a lot of peace in that for me, and it works well for me. So, and I like to encourage that and teach others people that.
I actually am very, I really, I don't know what's the word. I feel that same sentiment in myself for that concept of not needing to feel like I need to always chase money and become wealthy in that sense of having those tokens of wealth that are given to us, that we utilize for transactions. but my happiness comes through that trying to create that connection with people and land. And I think that's something that's very important for us to begin teaching children, which is why we are trying to develop this network of the Unity Garden Learning Centers as well.
Absolutely. And it's very important work. I think what you're doing, it's definitely a step in a direction that's needed. There's a couple of questions here, or a couple statements. So I'm going to go back a little bit. So I see yours, Lloyd. I'm going to start after. I don't know if there's any beforehand, but Sarah says, oh, hey, Sarah. Sarah's a friend. I'm just looking for the land acknowledgement comment. So Judy says, I think land acknowledgement has to be backed up with actions to support the relationship. Yes, I agree with that 100%. And that I always say we got to start somewhere, and so this is a start for it. And I think that as we go along with this, I think in the long run, if this becomes a regular thing, because more people are starting to do it, but we just got to maybe remind them, as Judy's stating here, that it's got to be backed up with actions to support the relationship. Now, a recent thing that my tribe just did with the DNR is they're working collaboratively on a forest plan, which I've been wanting to see for years. And I don't know if any other tribes in Michigan are doing that. I think there is, but it's good to see that, because right now, tribes, we have our treaties, and our treaties give us the right to go into the woods and wild harvest. But the people that are actually managing the forest, for the most part, are what's called the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources. And that's a state entity, a Michigan state entity, that is basically controlling the forest with really very little feedback from indigenous people. But there's many of us that are working to change that. And an example of that is we're trying to prevent trees that we've harvested from, whether they're birch trees that we peeled the bark off of, and it still allows the tree to live, to build our canoes and our crafts, or trees that we've used to harvest our medicines from. We're asking the DNR not mess with those trees, because when we go and harvest from trees or plants, we're kind of making a promise to them. I always say, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to make sure that the water is as clean as I could do, or to help out. So that part right there is my personal commitment. But if I find out that the state's going to go there and cut these trees that I just make the promises to, then that ruins my prayer. And that therefore to me goes against our treaty rights, because they're cutting our relationship that we have with the lands by doing this. They're cutting off that very important connection that us and our ancestors have established for thousands of years. Okay.
And I was thinking, as you were saying, especially at the beginning of your sentence as well, like, who gave them, the state, that permission to be the stewards and not the indigenous peoples? So I think this is a reset, or in thinking around how do we reset these relationships? How do we give, or perhaps realign our relationships to that land, to the land, and what's growing on the land, in ways that acknowledge that both peoples, the settlers and the indigenous peoples, need to share this land, and should both be stewards. So this is actually embedded in our concept of practical reconciliation, as we call it, where we would like to establish some systems of management of the lands that also include the indigenous peoples as well as the settlers. And it's not just the settlers, you say the DNR, right, managing the forest,
Right.
who gave them permission to do so. They took that from the indigenous peoples when they arrived, and they assumed that role. but actually it is the Indigenous peoples who have that ancestral connection to the land. And I think we do need to acknowledge that. As a settler myself, I'd like to assist in establishing systems, demonstrating systems where we can work together to protect the land and restore the land and ensure the land is abundant for at least, as we say, as we have learned, 7 generations. As we look forward to the well-being of our children and their children and their children's children.
Absolutely. And thank you, Lloyd, for saying that. I think that, you know, the one thing we always talk about, especially the environmental activists that I know of in Indian country, is that we need to assert our rights. And because you're right, you know, we didn't assert them. We were oppressed people. We were beaten down. If we spoke at a certain point, we were, you know, condemned. We were told to shut, you know, my tribe actually fought against the United States back in the War of 1812. And that might sound terrible to some people that might be, you know, like, well, I can't believe that. Why did they do that? Well, simply, the British were treating us better. They were going to give us more land, more opportunity. Chiefs were made officers, and if they lost a limb, they were paid money. And the American side, it was basically, you know, hey, you just help us out. That's all. And so a lot of my tribe that was up there on the Canadian border, or what is now the Canadian border, we fought against the Americans. And then when the War of 1812 basically was won by the U.S., the people that were involved in it were kind of retaliated against, you know, because if you think about it, 1812, and then our tribe signed the 1836 treaty, that wasn't that long afterwards. So there was still maybe some memories of resentment in that. But the one thing we stopped doing at that point is we stopped asserting, we stopped understanding, or we didn't understand some of the laws that existed. My relative, Xinghua Kantz, was one of the first activists in the area. And I think right around the mid 1800s, there were miners that went onto his land and started mining. And he knew that was his land, and he took a cannon and he fired it into the mine. And of course, you know, freaked them out. He got arrested. They took him to jail down in Toronto, and he hired an attorney. This is back in the 1800s, and he got out. And there's actually a picture of him and the attorney who was non-Indigenous, and he's wearing regalia. It's a crazy picture. I mean, my relatives were crazy, and it's a crazy picture, but I think, you know, he was just kind of making a bold statement about, I mean, he's an inspiration to me. He was very traditional. He was into our spirituality, which is Meday. Up in Wawa, he was one of the last people to do a painting on the rock up there. That is a very sacred place for the Anishinaabe. But I don't want to get too sidetracked, because there's a zillion, Lloyd, as you're probably figuring out, there's a zillion different subjects I like to talk about, but I want to get back to what here, the land acknowledgement. Kevin was saying, I've learned to respect woven into announcing who my grandmothers were and where they came from, and when they got to Canada with my introduction to my Indigenous friends. That's great. That's nice, Kevin. I like that. We got a couple more.
So I'd actually like to open up the floor, and if anybody would like to actually introduce themselves as Nathan has suggested, and open up their mic, open up their camera, and actually let's have a conversation rather than just going through the chat, so we can hear your voice.
Bonjour, bidway gisu kwe nandesna cause. Bako manomanika manasnakwa ngununjaba. Oasasi do them. Ego atish kun de ni gani mama. Bungi itgo ni natajo poemoen. Forgive me, ikduan jaganasi moen. I really appreciate the subject of the land acknowledgement, and it got me to digging deep within me, because it's something that, you know, do it so many times, it's like a habit, and you kind of like take it for granted. And especially for me as an Anishinaabe, because when I travel to different places across the United States and wherever I've been to, when I get there, that's the first thing I do is offer my tobacco to whoever the tribal lands that I recognize and put my asema down over there. So, to me, that's like the land acknowledgement, that's been passed on from generation to generation to generation. And to be able to go and see what they're doing. And, it's really it's something that's good. It's good to be able to, see what those things are happening on those lands, those issues and things like that, to be able to talk about it when I go back home to where I live here in Minnesinaquang areas. So, Miigwech, Nathan, and I can't read your name right now, for those of you that are in on this. And, I'm always learning more things every day. And I keep telling myself, you're not old, just keep educating yourself. And, there are folks that are out there that will educate you. Otherwise, I get come at and I said, okay, on my own territories, people want to come at me like in some sort of way. And I said, okay, well, come and teach me, then educate me. And it's like right there, it stops. They don't want to educate me. So like forums like this or places like this on Zoom, to be able to educate myself even further, that's a blessing. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Tanya.
Thank you.
Tanya is a very she's very humble but Tanya has done a lot of great work on water protection. She's one of the Quay in Minnesota that have really, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Tanya, she's just done amazing work over there. She's completely committed herself to helping out with stopping Line 3 and the oil pipelines that are we have a lot of concern with, because we don't want it to contaminate or pollute our waters. And that's essentially it. I mean, it's real simple. We're not, people get mad at us sometimes and they don't understand that we're trying to protect the water for all. And we feel that these pipes, especially the one that's in this area, the Line 5 and Line 3, they just put in Line 3 in Minnesota, and Tanya was basically part of that. It was literally like a modern day war. And there were situations that happened there, arrests that were done, disrespecting of our culture and traditions, that it eventually made some of these camps become modern day cultural teaching places for our youth, because it actually became more than just going to like a powwow. You're actually going to an event where we're coming there as perhaps in some cases as warriors, and then, not with the intention of fighting or beating up anybody, because we always follow the being peaceful protectors. But still, there's moments when police overreact, and people get arrested, and people like Tanya have put themselves on the line and are the true warriors for our protection of the water. And so I'm honored for her to be here. Miigwech.
I'm just seeing, actually, Kevin made a good point in the chat. He said, if you can stop your screen share, Nathan, then we can open up the space for everybody to be on the camera. So if we have, people can set up what's called gallery view. I see myself, I see Kevin right now, but it would be great if we could actually, we have about 15 minutes before we're going to be eventually kicked off of the call, but I'm hoping that people will be able to turn on their cameras. And if anybody else would like to share any more thoughts before we wrap up our session for today, I would like
I'd be interested in asking just a general question to everyone joining us today. are there actions happening in your area? Are there gatherings happening in your own watersheds or where we all may be? Like what is happening in by presenting ourselves to the street? And maybe are there opportunities for us to unite on things like this and do a grow our representation, not just on screen, but on the ground where Mother Nature needs us as well. Thanks.
I can answer that. I know Lloyd's got his extensive calendar that he talked about earlier, which is good. But regarding water protection, we have a list that Paul Demain of Honor the Earth put together, and I could probably post that somewhere on either my site, which I'll actually at the end of my presentation. I didn't really finish that presentation because I had some information at the end of it. So maybe I'll share that here real quickly while we're talking about it. So I will share the screen, and then you guys can grab the information while it's there, and then we'll go ahead and go back to doing the questions in that.
So
Or-
again, we do only have about 15 minutes, a little
Okay.
less than 15 minutes now, but certainly let's have more people introduce themselves. And as well, what I wanted to mention that Kevin has actually suggested fairly recently is that we consider perhaps a follow-up action among those who have arrived with us today on this call to establish what Kevin called a council of watershed grandmothers. This was something Kevin put forward as a suggestion, because we know it is the mothers and the grandmothers who are the protectors of the waters, and they are the ones that are going to be able to, I think, move the needle on protecting our watersheds. So I'd like to make that suggestion as well, if that could be something what we could follow up on. We here in UnityNet, what we do is we use social media. We're using primarily WhatsApp and Facebook and LinkedIn as our discussion groups and social media groups for connecting with people, both in the public sphere and in the professional sphere through LinkedIn networks. So this is what we are doing by creating this, what we call network of networks on social media with our allies in the African communities and the African diaspora. So with that, I'm hoping that it could be possible where we could move forward with taking that motion forward on the Council of Grandmothers concept. And I don't know if Kevin might want to elaborate on that and his concept and ideas for it.
Yes, thank you. I'll be quick. I wasn't really prepared for it today. However, the concept has developed and spawned out of a small philosophical group talking about transitional governance and transitional leadership, and how to create the landing pad, if you will, of another party, another political party, another political concept that brings pre-colonial democratic process like citizens assembly from the Greek era, citizens assembly, indigenous consensus models, and take a look at the various consensus models of pre-colonial democratic process, and take these two historical concepts of consensus and people's assemblies, and then rebuild a transitional governance model that is built upon those pre-colonial philosophies and then blended with new philosophy, which is one of them is out of India. It's called neighborocracy, which centers youth within community management systems. And it's designed that with the 17 United Nations Sustainability Development Goals as part of its policy, as the youth within neighborocracy are given specific roles to accomplish the UN SDGs. So there's automatically in every neighborocracy community, there's 17 ministers that are specifically managing how that community does within the sustainability development goals. That neighborocracy is a third corner of this transitional governance model. And the final corner, or the fourth cornerstone, if you will, would be the grandmothers, the council of a global council of watershed grandmothers. And what that does is that puts the youth and the grandmothers together at the table within the governance model. So this is just a concept that we've been working on for probably 3 years now. And, the pandemic put a lot of us on our kitchen tables and in front of screens like this. So with that comes the development of ideas that we get to share. And now we're at the backside of what looks like to be this pandemic is an opportunity for us to unite face to face and share these ideas and these concepts together, looking at the trajectory of consciousness. And if I can share just the final words that I've shared with others, that and the importance of my connections with Indigenous nations of my territory of where I live, is that from listening and bringing myself to Indigenous communities to listen and find out where I can be of service. This is where I've realized and learned that consciousness has no reverse, no brakes, and no borders. Consciousness only has a trajectory. And that trajectory has put me here today with all of you. So thank you very much for that, and for Nathan for you being here today. I'm really, really grateful
Thank you, Kevin.
that we had a cancellation and that we were able to put it together. So thank you.
And I would like to thank you as well very much. So for making the introduction to Nathan. I think we have a very different audience today. I know that we had some people, I think, earlier on from our existing network, the Global Unity Network, the UnityNet, from Africa, from the United States, but the makeup of today's conference and call is quite different, as opposed to what we have seen in terms of who has come on to our calls prior to these. As I noted before at the introduction, and I'm sure many of you who have come on later, this is actually week number 96 of this Indigenous Global Unity Summit event series. So we have been doing this for every Thursday for a very long time. And so we are continuing basically to try and bridge the Indigenous communities of Turtle Island, the Americas, Turtle Island also inclusive of Central South America as well. So all of the Americas with the Indigenous peoples of Africa and Asia, Eurasia, to bring together all Indigenous communities from around the world to speak with one voice for the protection of Mother Earth and nature, and to try to stave off and prevent this collapse of the biosphere that the current paradigm of development is headed toward, as they call it, the Anthropocene that we are now entering. So this is part of the work that we try to do to change the consciousness of the entire next generation of young people, so they can really reconnect with the land and reconnect with their watersheds and protect and restore nature back into its abundance. So Zachary, you'd like to say a few words as well?
Oh, bonjour, Zach King, Indigenous cause, the Anishinaabe, we Salin, Wamish Kimakwa, Indigenous cause, Makwanino, Dem, Anishinaabe, and Dow, Mikanak, Ju, Sipi Sing, and Ninjiba. Bonjour, and Nijiwak. I had a question as far it's to the whole, to everybody. It's in regards to science and spirituality. As far as like the relationship to the plants, things that we try to harvest. I guess I was wondering if anybody has read the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin A. Kimmerer. She dives deep into the spiritual aspect as well as the scientific aspect. I guess I was just going off of what Nathan was talking about with the relationship to plants. I think I've found a lot of what would you call it? Not really in sync with people that from the scientific community and the spiritual community. As far as the relationship to plants, like in spirituality, we like Nathan had mentioned about offering tobacco, and things as like talking to plants, having a relationship with that plant, especially in Anishinaabe, Mawim. They talk about what is that called? Animate and inanimate. Well, if you're thinking in a spiritual sense or a traditional sense, everything is animate, everything has a spirit. So I guess my question to everybody is, have you found a resistance between spirituality and science as far as dealing with plants and medicine?
Like, maybe shorten that up, Zachary, because you were kind of mumbled there, but the difference between spirituality and what was the other part?
I guess spirituality and science, because in a spiritual sense, that offering that tobacco and prayer to the plant, as to science, they seem to kind of bump heads, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so I wrote in the chat, sort of tried to summarize what you just said, Zachary. So I wrote as your question, have you found that there is a resistance to the spirituality within science? So let's say as a scientist is studying a certain plant, are they giving those plants the respect that they should be getting? Are they creating a relationship with those plants? Or are they trying to just be observers and not going through any spiritual?
It's for me, when I go out there, I think with natural law. That's what I think of. I think in that regard to that supersedes everything. But I know what you mean with the conflict happens. Well, it's like with the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources. There is a conflict with our spirituality and our relationship with the lands when they go out and cut, trees that we've harvested. It's almost literally like cutting our church for mainstream people to understand. It's almost like tearing down. And that's a concept that I think mainstream has a hard time understanding, because they're saying, hey, wait a minute, there's no buildings here. You didn't put any money into this. But in a way we have. We've invested our time. Our ancestors were there. Just because, everything that we did was biodegradable and it's gone, you can't see the remnants. We were there, and one of the slides I didn't show at the end was that we don't have a right to, we don't view things as we have a right to go in the woods and harvest. We view things that we have a responsibility to go take care of the woods. And that concept is it's the hardest thing we have, Zachary, is to explain to scientists or the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, the ones who manage the forest here in Michigan, to explain to them how our spirituality is what we guide upon ourselves and how we react with the land. Because a lot of times I think they just think we're making this up, like because they're so far removed from it, or they don't want to understand. And so, and the same thing with scientists. I mean, it's like pharmaceutical companies, you know, they'll take a
So,
plant.
I'd like to, I don't want to cut you off, Nathan, but I'm seeing the clock is 1:01 on my clock. We might be thrown off of this Zoom call because this is a channel that's being hosted by our media partner. So they may just throw us off at any instant. Now, I just would like to wrap up and say thank you to everybody right now before that might happen, where we're going to be probably thrown off of the call because they do use the same channel for other people to use. But I would like to say thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Zachary. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all who have come on the call today. I'm hoping that we'll have more Indigenous voices on these calls, our Thursday calls, which we do every week. Again, this is week number 96. Most of our guest speakers are actually coming from Africa, including Indigenous people, including people from, for instance, communities that have been marginalized on that continent for many decades. Usually, people have been forcibly displaced in various communities, like the encampments, places like in Kenya and other places around the world. But our intention is to connect these communities here on Turtle Island with those communities around the world. But we also have some connections in places like India and Sri Lanka and the Philippines. Again, many marginal people that have not normally had a voice, that we're trying to bring their voice to the forefront and make sure that they are heard, and they also have a place at the table when decisions are being made, which is one of the most important activities that we're trying to do through our UnityNet empowerment networks that we are trying to establish in every local community. So again, I'm sorry for having to cut you off. I just wanted to sort of sum up our purpose and why we are here before we are kicked off of this Zoom call. And I'm surprised that we've even been given another 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lloyd. I just want to say miigwech to everybody, miigwech to UnityNet and the Indigenous Global Unity Summit and their partners. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all my friends who took the time out of their busy day to join us. I hope something valuable was learned, and I always appreciate seeing many of you.
So since we are still on, let's continue until we're actually completely cut off. I don't know, Zachary, if you wanted to say a few more things, or if that's just a remnant of when you had previously put up your hand to say something.
I guess the reason why I brought that question up was just because where I'm from in Turtle Mountain, we've been trying really hard to grow wild rice, but our lakes just aren't taking it, as well as sweetgrass too. We've been trying really hard, and so that's why I wanted to touch on the relationship between plants, like Nathan was talking about. Because even with prayer and everything else we've been trying to do, it just hasn't been working out.
Where you at, Zach?
Turtle Mountain, North Dakota. We're right in the middle of North Dakota, about 30 miles from the Canadian border.
Right. There's probably some people in Minnesota that might be able to, maybe you guys could go to like in August and learn from them, and they might share with you some of their experiences and, you know, what to look for in that. I would suggest that. And if you can't find anyone, get a hold of me. We also do this here in Michigan too. You know, maybe take a trip over here with a group of people, and maybe we could help out with that.
So the other thing I'd like to mention as well one more time is that people can save the chat. If they go to the bottom of their Zoom screen and press the 3 little dots, there's an option that allows them to save the chat. So everything that's been entered into the chat window. And then I'd also like to ask if people want to share their contact information in the chat, that can be saved so other people can now connect with you and we can build our local networks. This is actually what we're doing as what we call, we are looking at those sustainable development goals of the United Nations, those 17 SDGs, and we're saying, how do we localize that? How do we globalize that? How do we think globally, act locally, and create local networks to empower our what we call humanitarian entrepreneurs in our own communities to take action to actually deliver those solutions locally. So achieving zero hunger, achieving good housing, good food, and all of these goals that we want to achieve, how can we do that from within our own communities? And so we are building those structures that allow us to do that. So Kevin, did you want to say a few other additional things?
You know, I just would like to suggest, you know, that potentially we look at ways to propel our own individual efforts by sharing that amongst this group, like Facebook, our social media stuff. Like I know I have this question about land back, right? In the region where I am in, land back is a big discussion right now within Indigenous nations. And my question, my idea about land back is how to expand the concept of hashtag land back into cross borders, cross time zones, cross jet streams, because ultimately land never went anywhere. It was the responsibility to look after it that changed. So maybe what's happening up here right now in this part of Turtle Island of land back, maybe this land back narrative and this concept of land back by way of working with groups like this can be raise consciousness in other time zones, so that we can talk about what land back should maybe mean in a larger context than just the area where people are talking about it to me, closest to me right now. How do we take the advantage of all the work that you put in, Lloyd, around all the work that's been done, and stream, if there are half dozen hashtags that you can give us in a chat, Lloyd, that we can search ourselves and bring us to, you know, to all the work that this group has been doing for so long. And maybe if we share our hashtags in amongst this group, it will help bring this consciousness concept together.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is actually part of the reason why I have actually a fairly extensive list of hashtags with each promotion. Whenever I do promote the IGU Summit event, there's a long list of hashtags of the various concepts that we are promoting. The number one thing, of course, is this concept of globalizing the global goals, and with the purpose of achieving what we call a globalized, productive, compassionate, collaborative, regenerative economy that leaves no one behind. And it's a mouthful, but I've said it so many times over these many weeks that it's become embedded in my philosophy of why we are doing this work. It's this concept of reshaping the economy to what we would like to achieve for our children and their children and the next 7 generations.
So if I can then suggest then, Lloyd, because I've gone through the hashtags that are often shared within this community here, and the hashtags that are shared are only hashtags that are directly related to this community. It's not hashtags that it's not a hashtag that anyone else is using that connect other like-minded action groups doing things, right? So if I look at some of the hashtags, and I do this often, when people promote hashtags, I'll click on the hashtag and find out how active it is. Because what I'm talking about is hashtags that are functioning within the 90 some odd weeks of calls that you've been doing and presentations that people have spent time on, but find the hashtags that percolate to the top, that there are other people sharing those hashtags and attaching their action or their motivation to a hashtag that we're using, right?
And
that's
I
what
agree with
hashtag that's an active hashtag that doesn't just lose people, right? But we can have youth join.
And this is absolutely right, Kevin. I agree with that, and I will try to actually do that and implement additional hashtags into our promotions as well. It's just my list had gotten so long because what we wanted to do, especially during the first year, 2022 was a year for establishing our calendar. We also wanted to set up 2022 as a year for establishing our own set of hashtags that are unique to us. And that's what we did. We used those hashtags again and again and again for the first, at least the first 90 so weeks of doing these events. Now that we have those out there, hopefully we will be recognized as those are our set of hashtags. Now we can append new hashtags that connect us to those other communities.
Well, I want to thank you guys again.
Guess
I
the
want to
point,
thank you guys for that. I
point
know a
what
lot of
I'm
people.
missing, I guess the point that I'm not getting across, the point that I'm not getting across is that we're not using already hashtags that already have a momentum that we're not attaching to that, right? So I'm talking about hashtags like climate crisis, act now, tell the truth, water is life, what's swift and strong, like all these other hashtags that have lives of their own that we're not sharing, we're not borrowing the momentum of those hashtags by adding hashtags that are not relevant to this group directly, however, are relevant to this group from the concept of being like-minded, right? That's what I'm trying to talk about. I'm not really talking about the hashtags that you are creating, Lloyd. I'm talking about the hashtags that are like-minded, that have million followers, right?
Yep, no,
That's
absolutely. That's what I'm saying is that we had spent the first year using and creating these new hashtags for ourselves. Now I think it's correct that we can now branch out and start using those hashtags that are in the mainstream and being used by others. So we can now start connecting those communities to our own.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. So, I mean, this sounds like something you guys need to talk about, between yourselves. And I just want to be respectful of everyone here, and we're at past 1 o'clock. And I want to thank you again, Lloyd. I want to thank you too, as well, Kevin. And, I want to acknowledge too, Jim McDonald, a well-respected herbalist here that joined us. I appreciate him, Judy Pamp and her family and the work she's done in the Indigenous community. And of course, I've already talked about Tanya and Carmen Harrington as well, a good friend up here in Northern Michigan, and all of the others, Zachary, appreciate you being here, and as well as Lindsay. So I just wanted to thank everybody. I look forward to maybe doing something like this again. And wanted to remind people too, this is the first time we're announcing this publicly, is June 19th. We're doing a big Heart of the Turtle gathering, which is actually going to be a Northern Michigan herbal conference. But we're also going to talk about, we're going to have people bring water and soil samples to the event to get it tested, as well as other local groups and what they're doing to help protect the lands and environment. But the focus of it is going to be around herbal plants. But we're just going to have an expansion of, more than just what you would normally see at a water protection event. This is more of an herbal class to connect people to the lands on a personal one-to-one basis. And that'll be on Mackinac O'Day's website here shortly. So I appreciate all of you and thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day to be here with us.
So thank you very much, Nathan. And I want to thank everybody who's come on the call today with us. This is, again, Lloyd Helferty here in the greater Tkaronto bioregion, just north of the city of Toronto in Ontario, Canada, city of Markham. We are building our local Markham Interfaith Neighborhood Academic and Business Collaborative as an empowerment network for our young humanitarian entrepreneurs who are localizing the global goals. So again, Lloyd Helferty from the Greater Unity Network. My big claim to fame is that I am also the Goodwill Ambassador for the 5 Points Youth Foundation in Los Angeles and the Ad Hoc International Advisory Board of Goodwill Ambassadors, where I am a Goodwill Ambassador for Canada, La Francophonie, the Commonwealth of Nations, and Turtle Island communities. So with that, thank you all, and I will end this call today. Again, for those who wish to do so, they can save the chat, and we will hopefully hear from you all and have you on these calls again in later weeks.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, everyone.